Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, Kathy was my boss for a couple of years a while back. So thank you, Kathy, very much for inviting me here today. And thank you for all of you that are here instead of watching the Dodger game tonight. Let's push to the next slide. So my agenda for today, there'll be a brief overview of the agency that I work for, the Metropolitan Water District. We'll also be talking about sustainability issues related to groundwater. And then, of course, we've got the challenges ahead. I think Grace kind of posted some of those already, some of our challenges that we have ahead. And then we're going to dig a little deeper into some of our local groundwater issues in LA County. So do a little case study analysis. And then I'm going to summarize all that up, and you guys can have any questions that you have for me afterwards, if you like. So a brief overview of how things go, a little bit about Metropolitan. Metropolitan is the largest wholesaler of water in the world. We serve the 6-county area from Ventura County up here in the north, San Diego in the south, and we go out to the San Jacinto Mountains on the east edge. We serve water to 19 million people over our 5,200 square mile area. And interestingly, we support a $1 trillion regional economy for this area. We began our history importing water from the Colorado River, then from the Northern Sierra, and we also invest in local projects. Our sources of supply, again, come from the Colorado River Basin in the 7 states area along the Colorado River through the Colorado River Aqueduct. That takes about 25% of our supply for the entire region of Southern California. We have the State Water Project, which takes water from Northern California, from the Bay Area, where they're having the game right now, would come down through the State Water Project down into Southern California. So that is about 30%. And the remainder is local supplies, such as conservation, groundwater, water recycling, and desalinization. So I am going to Grace asked me to talk about some of the basic terms. So we're going to talk what is groundwater. So I have a little schematic here that kind of is a basic groundwater basin. I added a river in here because I thought it was cool. So let's look at the area here in tan. This would be the unsaturated zone. So this would be also called the vadose zone. I may call it that some places in my presentation. The green areas here would be aquifers. And in this example, I have an upper and a lower. Those would be areas with sands or gravels, areas where water moves quickly through them. This area in the dark green here would be what is called an aquitard. So that actually water doesn't pass freely through those areas. So if water is coming from the surface, it won't go into the bottom layer through this. Those are soils such as clays or silts might be something that would block water flow. The other thing I'm going to talk a little bit about throughout the presentation is the word forebay. So in groundwater speak, the word forebay would mean an area that's at an elevation within the groundwater basin that would be delivering water to an upper aquifer as well as a lower aquifer. Some examples of these would be in the Montebello forebay area where there's a lot of water goes. That's near the 10 and the 605. If you can visualize in Montebello, would be a large area for good groundwater recharge. So let's go back to our map. So Metropolitan works a lot with our local resources, and this could include a variety of different areas. We have our local resources program. I've got the little money bags here. So many of our agencies and partners throughout the region get money from Metropolitan for the development of local resources. So those would be in the areas of recycled water, groundwater recovery, and this is Metropolitan speak. There's a lot of Metropolitan speak within this, so I'm going to try to make it easier. That's groundwater treatment. So we help some of our partners within the region with money and funds to be able to provide groundwater treatment for wells that may be contaminated. And then we also provide incentives for seawater desalinization. We also have a funding program for the Future Supply Actions, which is low cost and low risk action that reduces barriers to local resources in the future. So those areas would be groundwater, water recycling, stormwater, and seawater desalination. We also do facilitation, including exercises like this, in making sure that the public and our stakeholders throughout the region understand what we're trying to do with water and groundwater specifically. So let's talk a little bit about, I know Grace had mentioned earlier about conjunctive use. So let's talk a little bit about conjunctive use, which is one of Metropolitan's big programs that we have. So what is conjunctive use? You may have heard this term before, and if you haven't, that's okay. It means that water is stored in groundwater basins in years when water is available. So think of those as wet years, when it's raining a lot. There's an opportunity where there's a lot of water available, the water is pre-delivered. Later, when it's dry, like it is this year, that previously stored water would be pumped out for beneficial uses. So Metropolitan has two conjunctive use type programs. One of those is our cyclic program, in which water is pre-delivered and it's paid for later. So there's no dry year performance required under the cyclic program. So as long as they purchase the water, they get to use it how they like. And for conjunctive use, this is the program that Kathy Kunysz managed for many, many years, was also a pre-delivery and paid for later. And this would have a dry year performance. So during a dry year, they would have certain provisions that those agencies would need to meet. This provides a really good benefit for our region, for our ratepayers, to be able to maximize their storage when we have it and use stored water instead of water from the Delta during times of drought.
What does performance mean?
Yes, good question. So performance would be things like they'd have to pump a certain amount above a long-term baseline. So they would have to pump from the account, and they'd have to verify that they pump from the account. So great question.
What they were supposed to be doing is taking less imported water at their service connection and pumping instead additional groundwater that they've got stored in the account that was pre-delivered, so that they can get off of the surface water delivery during the dry year when we don't have as much water.
Correct. So obviously,
okay, so we're required to draw that for, like, if dry year performance is required, we're required to pump that before using the state water project water, which isn't available this year.
Right.
Correct. That would be how that would work. Very good. Thank you, Kathy, for adding explanation for that. Yeah, so that would reduce the reliance on the state water project in years like this. So within our service area, we have 88 individual groundwater basins. I like to color code them a little bit so it's a little easier to see. And groundwater supplies a little over a third of the supplies within all of Southern California. And this is an updated number. 96% of the basins are adjudicated or managed. And what does that mean? So let's walk through the types of groundwater management. So there'd be three main types of groundwater management. So there'd be adjudicated, managed, or unadjudicated. And I could spend the entire evening talking just about this, but I don't think that's what you want to hear about. So adjudicated is a court judgment among basin parties. There's typically a water master that oversees the adjudication, and the entire adjudication, including the water master, reports to a judge for the adjudication. These are typically in basins in which there's been a long history of conflict. And so that that judgment kind of solves all of that. Managed would be where those basins that are governed by a groundwater sustainability plan or a groundwater management plan. Both of these are plans for groundwater that are defined by the state. And so they're created through a legislative mechanism. And last, and this is where it can get really fun. So these tend to be for unadjudicated. They tend to be a little bit smaller. And this is the fun part and the unique part about California water rights is that California is the only state in the entire country in which groundwater rights are divided into 2 different ways, or in this case, 3 different ways. There'd be the Pueblo rights, which those are based upon the original Pueblos. So those water rights came over from Spain. And when Mexico was part of that, so if they had water rights, the city of Los Angeles, for example, has Pueblo rights because they were part of the Pueblos under Spain. The next part of that would be riparian, which if you know about riparian habitat, those would be water rights that are based upon rivers or streams. So those would be groundwater rights that are under the influence of a stream or a river. So in the picture that I showed earlier, that was a groundwater basin that was under the influence, at least the area immediately beneath the river would have been riparian rights. And the last, that's the appropriative or overlying rights. So there are 3 different ways that water rights are determined by the state. And so it can get really complicated over time, but this is generally one of the least common ways here in Southern California. Most of ours are adjudicated or managed.
So who is a water master and what kind of qualifications do they have? And also the judge, is it a specialty judge that is versed in water law and water physics, or does it go by water law only?
Great question. Okay, so let's answer the first question first. I love that there are these questions throughout. This is great. So the water master would be an individual who is experienced in water and has a lot of water experience. So many of our basins within LA County are under an adjudication and have a water master. Tony Zampiello, for example, is the water master of the main San Gabriel Basin. And I'll talk a little bit about that adjudication in a little bit. And under the judge, they typically will have some level of water experience, although they do not have to. So that may go to a standard judge. And typically they do in most of these adjudications. But there was an interesting case up in Central California in an adjudication between wineries and municipal water districts, in which it was a jury trial that adjudicated the basin. And so the judge had no experience in water whatsoever. So it's actually not a requirement to have that, but they typically do.
There's been a discussion about having a water court where the judges specialize, and I don't know that it's ever gone anywhere, though I used to hear about it regularly, where they really wanted to have judges that understood both water law and the actual physical parts of how groundwater works, because the water law doesn't really reflect it.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
What percentage is adjudicated? What percentage is managed? And what's the split between these 3 categories?
So for adjudicated, those I think are right around 50% of the basins are under that adjudicated category.
You go back to that map.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to.
That would be a good way to do it.
Let's see if I can push back to that. I think I can. Oh yes, I can. Very good. So most of the ones in here, these are LA County, are mostly adjudicated. And this is San Bernardino County, those would be adjudicated. Here in Ventura County, managed. Orange County, managed. San Diego, largely in the managed category. Where you start to get a lot of the unmanaged ones are out here in Riverside County, where these are really small basins. And so you get, here's Arlington, Riverside. These ones tend not to be adjudicated. These really small ones in here are not adjudicated. So it's about 50-50 between adjudicated and managed, and then there's 4% left that are unadjudicated.
So just to put names on some of these, the yellow one is Chino Basin. The
Mhm.
orange is the large part of it is main San Gabriel Basin. Above that is Raymond Basin, where Pasadena is. The San Gabriel Valley is largely over the main San Gabriel Basin. Then moving to the green, this is Central Basin, and Matt had mentioned the Montebello Forebay, and that's down in this area here.
I'm circling it. Hopefully you can see my screen to see that I'm pointing to
Santa
it.
Monica Basin, which is tiny and literally only the city of Santa Monica relies on it. And then this is the West Coast Basin under the Bay Cities area. This is the San Fernando Basin, or upper, they call it upper Los Angeles River area. And then these are basins out in Ventura County. I don't remember all their names anymore.
It's been a long time, right? So these ones are in Ventura, but you generally get the idea. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail in these right here today.
These ones in San Diego are largely, you'll see they're long and thin, and they're largely little bits of groundwater that are associated with water courses. San Diego doesn't have much of a groundwater resource, and they're largely reliant on imported or surface water.
Are the managed basins, were they managed before Sigma?
Oh, long ago. Orange
Yeah,
County
most of
had
those
its
were
own
long before.
statute. And Orange County Water District is the entity that oversees the management. For these basins for Central and West Coast, it's the Water Replenishment District of Southern California, sometimes called WRD. Here, this was the main San Gabriel Water Master. Matt mentioned Tony Zampiello. Here, Tony Zampiello also is the water master for Raymond. Chino Basin has a water master. It's a gentleman, oh, I'm forgetting his name. He used to work for Glendale Water Department. What's his name?
Peter Kunysz.
Yes, he's very good.
So that I think sustainability goes back way before before Sigma.
Yes, here in Southern California, Sigma hasn't had a big impact because a lot of the basins were already operating under under some sort of adjudication or a groundwater management plan. Orange County has been under a managed basin since 1933, way before I was born.
And Redondo Beach, I think Redondo Beach, we started adjudicating it in the late 40s or early 50s, and then other places signed on. And I think Hawthorne was the last to sign on in 1970.
Probably, yeah, that would be in the West Coast Basin there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go. I love this discussion because
I'm sorry, we're slowing you down.
Oh no, not a problem at all. Because this is great.
The discussion is useful, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And some of it then will help me a little later to catch up a little bit, just because I'll be close to that point later. But yeah, it's a really a lot of management has happened in Southern California as opposite to Northern California and Central California, which just getting on being a managed basin as part of Sigma. So Sigma really had more to do with Central and Northern California than Southern California.
And for those who don't understand Sigma, it's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act that was passed. What year was it?
2016?
2014.
2014.
Yeah. And it has a long planning lead time because the groundwater basins in the Central Valley really have to come to grips with how they're going to stop over extracting groundwater, because they're mining groundwater so badly that they have substantial subsidence. I would guess 20 to 30 feet of ground sinkage, where it's a very substantial, and they're going to have to come to grips with how are they going to deal with that. So I think that 20 or 30 years that they've been given is longer than we have to to cope with that situation, but that's another matter.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, there's so much they've in the Central Valley, so much water has been extracted that it's changed satellite orbits because the missing mass doesn't have a gravitational pull anymore. And so it's altered satellite orbits.
That's,
That's really interesting.
yeah, I never heard that.
I didn't hear that before either.
Well, that's what the great satellites do. They measure the gravitational pull.
All right, so very good. I'm going to scoot on a little bit.
Yes,
So I did want to make sure that I made at least some reference to disadvantaged communities within our service area. It's about half of the population within Metropolitan service area, and I'm going to show you a graphic in a second. That a lot of these areas overlie the large groundwater basins. It's not saying that groundwater basins are somehow unfit for those that are of lower income. It is more that originally Los Angeles settled in the areas where there were great groundwater basins. And so the urban centers just happen to be in those areas. So I'm going to show you a little video, a short little description of how that works. So here's our little DAC areas throughout the metropolitan service area. Here's our groundwater basins. And you're going to click, and then you can see here's Central and West Coast Basin here. This would be the LA coastal plain area. Downtown LA is like right in the middle of this area. So large groundwater basins, lots of groundwater, which is why those areas were settled. So there is a nexus between groundwater and disadvantaged community areas and those that can help to be better served, which is one of the reasons why I look at being more sustainable in groundwater is just so important. It affects our entire region, and there's multiple locations where that could happen. So this is areas right in large groundwater basin areas tend to be there only because that's where the original areas were settled, where the agricultural parts first started, where the pueblos started because of water and groundwater specifically.
cool.
All right, we ready to talk sustainability? Oh yes, let's talk sustainability and how it affects groundwater. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my version of the groundwater cycle. So we get an average in LA County area of about 15.2 inches a year. So on a good year. On an average year, we get 15.2 inches of rainfall, which equates to 8.7 million acre feet. I just want to make sure we cover all the terminology I'm going to use. So how much is an acre foot? So here we have a standard American football field. So the football field between the end zones, approximately from the 0-yard line to the 10-yard line of the other, filled with 1 foot of water. This is Aquafina, filled with 1 foot of water. So this is 1 acre foot. And just to think of it another way, it meets the annual demands of a typical family of 4, including indoor and outdoor water use. So that's how much a acre foot is. So it's a lot that we get in our groundwater cycle, 8.7 million acre feet across the whole service area. So some of that goes into groundwater recharge, so it percolates into the ground. And that's not where I wanted that to go. We're going to go back. There we go. I wasn't ready for that slide yet. So some of that is active recharge. So that's in spreading basins. So I've got a picture of a spreading basin here. And now we're ready for that. So this is at the Santa Fe spreading grounds, just above the Santa Fe Dam. So it percolates into the ground through managed recharge facilities like these, where berms are put up into good recharge areas. And those are great for recharge. So this is in the main San Gabriel Basin. It also, for recharge, would be passive recharge. And I'm going to use this term throughout my presentation. So passive recharge is when it rains on the back of your yard and just rains and you see the water go into the ground. Think of that as there's no human influence on that. It's just naturally going into the ground. You could also call this natural recharge. So between the two of those, that's about 1.1 million acre feet, or about 12% of the precip that falls onto our service area where we live goes into groundwater. So 12% of the precip. So it really hurts in years like this when we don't have 15.2 inches of rainfall. So a lot of that water that rains onto our area goes into evapotranspiration. I've got a picture of a tree. I think we were talking about ET earlier. And so this is how much water that the trees and all of the plants throughout our area use. This is the majority of where the rainfall goes. So the rest of it that isn't recharged or used for ET goes to the ocean. So this ends up being 457,000 acre feet, or that just shows that of the rainfall that falls on our service area of the entire area of Southern California, 93% of it is either used for groundwater recharge or ET. Both are beneficially used. Yes, question. Was there a question? No? Okay. So what is groundwater sustainability in our region? So I'm going to define what I mean by that. So that would be reliability. So that's a long-term balance of pumping and recharge. And that's resilience. So we are going to talk about climate change today. So climate change and other vulnerabilities within our region, which ultimately leads to long-term sustainability. So of our groundwater production within metropolitan service area, we use about 1.5 million acre feet per year, which serves, again, about 6 million people use groundwater within Southern California out of our 19 million people. That amount has actually declined about 25% since 2000. So the fun stuff is, well, how do we reach our overall groundwater reliability? So I give you a pie chart. Out of the 1.5 million acre feet, it's supported by passive recharge here in the orange, stormwater capture, which is in the blue, and those two things would come from precipitation. So recharge that happened as a result of precipitation. So that's about 75% of the total pie of where our water recharge comes from. The remainder would come from imported water from either the Colorado River or the State Water Project, and the rest would come from recycled water. So the big red piece of pie there is unmet recharge needs. Okay, so this is where it gets to be fun. So about 2% per year is how much we are short. Over the last 20 years, we've been short on average 2% per year, which is about 35,000 acre feet, which makes us about 390,000 acre feet short as of 2021, cumulatively. So you're going to get to see that, I believe, in the next chart.
Wait, where did the active recharge, is that the stormwater?
Right, so that's stormwater. Right, so of that groundwater part, it's stormwater plus recycled plus these three parts here, plus the.
So the 325 of active recharge is in the blue stormwater pie?
It's in the blue stormwater pie. And then the remainder here is additional non-precipitation related recharge.
So the imported was the conjunctive use we were talking about earlier?
Right, so that would be spreading or injection of imported water from, yeah. And then this here portion would be in the yellow would be the recycled water. So there's recycled water recharge too.
So Jane, we're doing a lot better than the Central Valley, but we're not sustainable yet.
Correct. We're doing a lot better than the Central Valley.
I was going to say you probably don't have big problems with subsidence.
We do though.
Do you?
Mm-hmm. In some areas. When we get back to a groundwater map, I'll show you.
Yeah, Chino Basin, but I don't know any place else.
Yeah, out in Eastern.
Oh, in Eastern too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think
Oh.
San Fernando Valley sunk quite a bit before.
before. Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm going to give you a little diagram here that might be a little bit tricky to understand. So I'll walk through it slowly. Kathy's very familiar with this one.
Yeah, I know this one.
She knows this one really well. So the area here in black, think of this as the unsaturated zone or the vadose zone. This area here in the blue is the water level going up and down. So when the water level here comes up, that's when water levels are going up. And when it comes down, water levels are going down. So one thing I wanted to point out, since we have a really interactive group tonight, and I really am enjoying this a lot of fun. So think about these areas here up at the top would be wet years. So this is 1998, this is 2005, this is 2011, and this is 2017 and 19 here, combined right here. So what you notice is each successive wet year, we get less and less above where we should be. This here in the green is the healthy storage range. Each groundwater basin has an area where they'd like to operate, water levels where they'd like to be. And so that's what that's based on. So each successive wet year, we're not getting enough each year. So this is how we end up 350,000 acre feet short. And each dry year, we get lower and lower. And this is 2016, which was the lowest point within all of our groundwater basins. And we started to have losses in well capacity. As the water levels drop below certain portions in the well, they no longer function properly. And so this began to happen here in 2016. So we're not very far from that where we are now. So this is as of earlier this summer. I don't have updated data yet, but this shows where we are. We're about 350,000 acre feet below where we should be. And just keep this in mind. Here at the bottom, this is the critical storage level at which we would expect to see widespread loss of pumping capacity throughout our entire region. Our estimate here is we get a 30% reduction in groundwater capability if we got to this level. So just to put this in terms of years, we're about 12 to 18 months to here, and we're about 4 years to here. So if the drought continues for another 12 to 18 months, we'd be at our historic low as the sum of all the groundwater basins. And in up to 4 to 5 years, we'd be here at the lowest level. And there'd be significant issues going forward. So we have withdrawn since 2000, more than 1 million acre feet. Thinking about that, that's about 25% of the entire region's annual use that we're short. For groundwater recharge, total amounts are about 1 million acre feet, as we talked about earlier. So this is a full year behind as of today, or August 31st, which is the last time I've updated this chart. So that's some bad news. So in summary of the groundwater conditions, there's been a net loss of storage of 1 million acre feet. That's a full year of recharge within our service area that we're behind. Our bank account is low. As a result of at least the sense of being in drought, groundwater production has already declined 25%. And active recharge has declined 6% on average since 2000. So this is all the bad news. I will eventually talk about good news, just not right now.
Matt, when the groundwater productions declined 25%, has that demand shifted to imported water?
No.
What's happened with it?
Right. So basically what has happened with it is there's been an increase in conservation. So normally what we would expect is that 2016 was our most serious drought condition. 2017, we had rain. Normally in that 2017 to 2020 period, we would expect a rebound in terms of demand use and water use throughout our service area, but that has not happened. So actually overall demand is still low. I think as Kathy, you're a former Metropolitan person, we're celebrating when our sales at Met go above 1.5.
Yeah, I actually have screenshots from the West Basin conservation report from a couple years ago. We could show that later. It shows that poor areas conserved and continue to conserve since 2016, and wealthy areas rebounded in use. But a lot of that is just baked in. Poor areas never resumed watering their yards.
Correct. Very much so. Agree with that. All right. So let us talk about some vulnerabilities as we go through this one. All right, so this is where we've been over the last year. This is California, so let's talk about the precipitation. We're right around 50% of normal, which isn't really that bad. We would expect that during dry years. This is kind of an interesting feature, and I think we talked about this a little bit while we were chit-chatting before the meeting. Our snowpack was actually 72% of normal, and here right around 50% of normal. That's not really that bad. So why are we in such dire straits? Well, here we go. There's the fun. Actually runoff. So that's water that comes from the snow melt, and then goes into the rivers and streams and ends up being consumed at the lower end. That is 33% of average. So what's been happening is the hotter, dry conditions have been consuming the runoff before it gets into the rivers and streams. So even though we had a not bad year on the state system, we ended up in a very bad situation with respect to flows coming from Northern California to Southern California. And here's our Colorado River Basin scenario. So that's not too bad either. Rainfall, 85% of normal. Snowpack, 88% of normal. I mean, this is not that bad, right? This is not something to scream at. But here's the big deal. Runoff is 38% of normal. So that's water coming down the Colorado River to California is 38% of normal on the amount of flows. So that really creates a situation in which we have to deal with a lot of reductions on the Colorado River system. So just so that you all are aware, on the State Water Project system, there will be severe reductions in the amount that we're going to get for 2022. The state has no water left in many of our reservoirs here in the state level. So a lot of discussions at Metropolitan about how we'll deal with the conditions in 2022. For those that are aware of the State Water Project allocation system, there's going to be a 0% allocation on January 1. That is not a good situation considering we came off a low allocation system this year. And it is likely that the state will allocate based upon emergency needs only. So outdoor water use will be restricted throughout much of Southern California.
So, Matt, before you change the slide.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Questions. So when the runoff is so much lower than the precipitation, that suggests that what's happened is that the ET is very high and that the watersheds are very dry and are soaking up a lot of that water. And because the higher temperatures, the plants are transpiring more of that water. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that how we're getting those lower numbers?
Yep, ET is going way up.
And then and the soil moisture was way low.
Correct.
And so it's sucking up a lot of that too. Oh, I had another question. What was it? Oh, well, if it comes to me, I'll,
Yeah, so I really am enjoying the level of questions today, but definitely because the evapotranspiration has gone way up because of hot, dry conditions. Most of that water is consumed by plants before it actually gets into our waterways for overall recharge.
I remember the question. Okay, so looking at these maps, and we know that, well, California hasn't been affected yet by the shortage on the Colorado River. But the state water project allocation was pretty small this past year, right? What was it, 5%?
5% this year, 0% next year.
0% next year, unless it really rains and they change it. But Metropolitan still had water in their aqueducts. And the way they do that is they've got water in storage and they pull it out of storage and they put it in the aqueduct. Do you know, are you familiar with any of what Met did this past year, Matt? Or am I getting?
Oh, yeah, no, it's all good. Yeah, so we've actually, so before this drought happened in 2019, all of Metropolitan's reservoirs were 100% full. So we've been able to maintain deliveries throughout our service area due to previously stored water. There's a whole bunch of fun things we've been doing, moving water throughout our system. If you live in the San Fernando Valley, you normally would get State Water Project water exclusively. This year, you're going to get Colorado River water. Good times. I live here in Burbank, so that's a lot. It's good. It's a big change in terms of what water we get typically. So it's a lot of different things. I will tell you, for the first time in history, there was a shortage declared on the Colorado River for 2022. So we're going to have a 0% allocation, which we're going to have to rely on previously stored water, which we brought to Southern California within our reservoirs. And on the Colorado, we won't have any backup. But luckily, Metropolitan has stored a lot of water in Lake Mead, which has allowed us to maintain deliveries even during extreme drought conditions. That time is ultimately going to run out here shortly.
But that's why, Ruth and others, why we haven't really felt the drought so far, is because Met's had a lot of water stored in a variety of surface reservoirs and in groundwater basins too, I would imagine.
Yes.
And they've been pulling that water out of storage, hoping that they don't have to go to making restrictions, that the drought will break and we'll get some precip again to refill some of that storage before we end up having to go to restrictions. But we'll see what happens.
We will see.
We have stored, Metropolitan has a lot more stored paper water in Lake Mead than there's actual wet water in Lake Mead.
Correct.
I asked a question about the California aqueduct. When you drive along the west side of the Central Valley, as Kathy noted, there's water in that aqueduct. Is that being stored in San Luis?
Yes.
Okay.
Are they pulling water from any of the groundwater storage accounts?
Yes.
Central Valley? Yeah.
Yep. So it's a combination of, so water is stored in San Luis. And then it comes down into the terminal reservoirs down in Southern California. We also have been pulling a lot of our water, and although this is not necessarily part of my presentation today, Metropolitan has, over the last 20 years, initiated a lot of programs in the Central Valley, which is allowing us to continue to make deliveries to our customers within Southern California, even during one of the driest periods of all time, because of our conjunctive use within both our within Southern California and also within the Central Valley.
Yeah.
So again, those are previously stored water that we're now taking out now.
Okay.
San Luis Reservoir looks terrible, by the way.
Which one?
San Luis Reservoir.
Oh, yes, it does. Yep. but you have Pyramid and Castaic are nearly full.
Yes.
Get it? Okay, well, yeah, I think we have a great group here. Get it out of Northern California while you can.
Get it out of Lake Mead while you can.
Get it out of Lake Mead while you can. Yeah, it's a great, this is a fun group. Too bad it's recorded, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. We're all good.
Okay,
All right, so let's kind of walk into how climate change is going to affect our groundwater basins. So I'm going to kind of walk through some of the things. This will be in our 2021 IRP, which is coming out, our integrated resources plan, which will be coming out later this year or early spring. So this is the basis for a lot of the groundwater stuff that we're doing. So for precipitation events that are very large, so these would be in the 99th percentile, greater than 1.3 inches. So these are those atmospheric river events. So we're expecting that those atmospheric river events are going to increase precipitation up to 20%. I will tell you that those atmospheric river events don't go into the spreading basins and bypass those spreading basins and go straight to the ocean anyway, because they're too high intensity. So there won't be a big difference to our region as a result of that. Just there'll be chances for flooding, which I think is on my next slide. One of the other things that'll be happening is that the precipitation pattern is shifting backwards. My wife said I put forward, but I think I'm meaning backwards. So it shifts 1 to 2 months earlier in the year. So instead of most of our rainfall being January to March, it will now be December to February. So about 2/3 of our rainfall falls in this period anyway, December to February. So the climatologists are saying that would be an increase of about 20% during the earlier part of our rainy season, December to February. But there would be less likely to have less rainfall during March to the May timeframe and in the fall. So as you may have read in the LA Times yesterday, September had the lowest precipitation on record for a September. I don't really think that September has a lot of rainfall here in LA, but okay. And the summertime wouldn't really change at all. So we'd be less likely to have any miracle March events. So if you don't get rainfall by February, there's not going to be a lot of rainfall after that. This has pretty much been the pattern for the past few years anyway. I think we had last year's last rainfall was like March 6th. So here would be how this would go. So annual precipitation by the end of the century would increase 5 to 13%, primarily because of those atmospheric river increases, which would increase your average somewhere between 3/4 of an inch to 2 inches. But ET would also increase due to the increase in temperature. So you've got things going more and less. So stormwater capture would be flashier in nature. The big storms or atmospheric rivers would continue to bypass any of our recharge facilities because they're not really built for, they're built for slow infiltration, not fast. So those would just bypass those as they do now. The stormwater capture would decrease by 3 to 8% by the end of the century. Passive recharge, which is normally driven by rainfall, would increase a little bit as a result of this. But again, you've got an increase in ET. So the overall change in groundwater recharge would be a decrease from somewhere between 0 and 1.1% by the end of the century. So that's, we're already short by 2%. If you remember from my slide earlier, this would maybe make us as much as 3 to 4% by the end of the century that we'd be short on average. So let's talk about some other vulnerabilities: water quality, climate change, which we just talked about, declining storage, which we are currently experiencing, and a heavy reliance on a single resource, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So hopefully we'll get a chance to go through that. So that would be PFAS, nitrate, TDS, And perchlorate and other VOCs are primary water quality issues. Hi, Kathy. Yep, you got a question?
Volatile organic compounds, things like, that are coming off of, the contamination plumes that associated with
Dry cleaners.
dry cleaners,
Gas stations,
gas stations,
refineries.
old industry, where
Like jet
they're
fuel.
using it for
Mhm.
metal cleaning, jet fuel, so around airports.
Yeah, all sorts of solvents and fuels.
And-
Solvents and fuels primarily. Perchlorate comes from rocket fuel, JPL.
In the
Also,
Raymond Basin, Ruth, that's where we live.
Isn't perchlorate also used for dry cleaning too?
no, I don't think so.
I thought it was perc.
That was maybe. I'm not aware of that application. But perchlorate is also in fertilizers from Chile.
Oh,
Specifically.
that's right. That's right. Didn't Pomona win a lawsuit about that?
Yes.
Okay. And TDS is total dissolved solids. That's what we have over here in the West Basin. We have salt in our water, in our wells.
Yeah. Great.
What's the source of PFAS?
All sorts of fun stuff. More from the industrial stuff. You've got foam from firefighting. You've got all the Teflon that you've ever used in your life. A whole bunch of other industrial
Scotch Guard.
Scotch Guard on your sofa. Any of that kind of stuff is all PFAS. And that generally is coming from areas of urban runoff. So it'd be the urban areas from the streets that are coming into your groundwater basins. And it's also showing up in recycled water because your body already has a lot of PFAS in it just because of your natural environment. So it ends up going in through the recycled water system.
And
Where
then
do you get
nitrates.
Microfibers.
I'm sorry?
Microfibers?
Yes.
Although microfibers don't really show up because we have advanced water treatment here in LA.
Yes.
Did you read that recent article about how this one village in northern Sweden, where they do all the scientific balloon releases, they actually shed more microfibers than the 1.5 million people of Vancouver. Urban areas, we have more, we precipitate out all the fine stuff, all the fine sediments.
Very good.
The source for nitrates in groundwater is old land uses where you lived in a former agricultural area where there might have been citrus or vineyards. So it was coming from fertilizer, where you had dairies, like out in the Chino area, or where you had septic systems. So in La Cañada and up in Altadena, where there were septic systems, they've got nitrates in the groundwater stemming from that.
Yep. So you name a contaminant, it's pretty much there's a lot of different contaminants in a lot of different areas. I think we talked about some of the climate change stuff already, and some of the things that we do get is the smaller production amounts and potentially subsidence. That's reduction of the land surface as a result of overpumping. And heavy reliance on imported water or groundwater puts pressure on all kinds of resources, which I believe is coming up shortly. So hopefully that'll be in the coming slides in how that goes. So some opportunities for us to talk about today, because this is where the positive stuff comes in. Opportunities for increasing potable reuse. This is recycled water. So using recycled water to recharge groundwater basins. And potentially upstream of other treatment processes. So there's a lot of different projects. I'm going to talk about the Regional Recycle Water Project, which is ours. Yes.
Does everyone know what recycled water is?
Well, there's so many different kinds.
Well,
There's so many different kinds.
I mean, it's all the water that goes down your drain. Whether it's your shower or your toilet or your kitchen sink, it goes down a sewer and ends up at a treatment plant. In our area, Los Angeles County Department of Sanitation. And when they treat that water and they remove a lot of the contamination, then they can discharge that and it becomes recycled water. It's not safe to drink at that point because we don't know, what we don't know about what's in that water, but it can become potable water through a number of mechanisms. And so I just wanted to mention that.
Yep. Great.
Sorry.
Right, you just apply money and energy, and you can turn it into whatever purity you want.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed. Money and more energy. There are some opportunities where we can maximize the use of our groundwater basins. There's actually some basins, and I haven't talked about this really up until this point. There are some basins that are not maximizing the storage that they have. And there's actually a lot of basins that actually don't use their full adjudicated rights either. That would be most of the areas within the LA County area. Would probably not be using all of that. And then there are some areas where treatment could be improved.
And why don't they use all their rights?
That's a whole bunch of great questions. I could give you 1,000 different reasons. Primarily, the reasons that they don't use it include water quality issues related to the wells that they have. The other is aging infrastructure from the wells. You'd be surprised how many wells are over 150 years old that are still in use. Especially within the city of Los Angeles, this is definitely a real issue. And so a lot of times a city will choose not to fix them and instead purchase imported water from Metropolitan because it's easier to sell to their boards that they're purchasing water from Metropolitan and blaming Metropolitan for the increase in price rather than investing in their own local infrastructure. This is a universal issue in groundwater basins. So there's primarily those are the biggest two. It's very difficult to get $10 million from a board for improving your groundwater infrastructure. For a small city especially. So yeah, and treatment too is pretty expensive. For a lot of this kind of treatment, things like perchlorate, $500 or more an acre foot. And so it ends up being pretty expensive for a lot of entities.
How much do the activated charcoal beds cost per acre foot?
Those are pretty small. So they're somewhere between $50 and $100 an acre foot. But those would not be applicable for something like perchlorate. So you'd have to go to the next level of treatment, potentially RO, reverse osmosis, which pushes chemicals through a membrane. And so big things don't get through, big things like chemicals. So that is actually one of the things that makes things really expensive. Things like activated charcoal can treat some things, but not all things. So it starts to get expensive for things like PFAS is very difficult to treat. And so those RO is generally the way to go there. Although there are some tests being done for other things and other methods to undergo for those. But again, all of those are expensive.
Over in Montbello, they're using activated charcoal for the PFAS.
Interesting.
And they're not detectable afterwards.
Interesting. That's surprising. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, Cal Water says that that's what they're doing.
Matt,
right.
I'm Jan Bush in Claremont, Pomona. What's the Chino Basin project? That's a potable reuse?
Yes. So For the Chino Basin project, it's actually a project that will be, they have a large treatment, recycled water facility in which they aren't using all of the water from it. So the water ends up being dumped down the Santa Ana River because they're not actually using all of it. And so they're trying to maximize the use of that facility. And so it's actually going to be doing a recharge of recycled water in the Cucamonga area, like right around the 210 freeway. They have some spreading grounds there already. And so that water would be recharged there, and ultimately wells would be put back to put it into Metropolitan's pipeline, into our Rialto feeder. Yeah, Kathy, don't choke. Sun Liang has retired. So that's kind of what that project is about. The Regional Recycle Water project is our project, and I'll talk in detail about that one, as well as LADWP's Operation Next. San Diego Pure Water is an advanced water treatment. So it has a long treatment train, and that will be used for reservoir augmentation and groundwater recharge in San Diego.
And when advanced water treatment usually means reverse osmosis, so you get the purest water out.
Correct. Yep, that's what that typically means. So I'll walk through our process for our regional recycled water program and talk a little bit about LADWP's Operation Next. So this would be our project. So this would have water start from LA County Sanitation District's facility, their joint water pollution control plant. You might call it, they call it the joint plant here in Carson, and would deliver to these 4 groundwater basins in this area here in these 4 groundwater basins through new pipelines, new facilities, and then potentially go up to 2 of our water treatment plants. So it'd go through a series of treatment trains and then be treated again for use within Metropolitan system.
And
Why do we pump it uphill at great energy cost instead of just treating it and spreading it where it's used?
That is a great question. So the sanitation districts already has other facilities in these other areas. I don't have a map here, where they use all of the flow that comes down into those areas. And so the flow that doesn't get into those is fully utilized for golf courses, other irrigation. So all the water that comes through this whole area upstream of it is used for other uses. And then whatever is left over comes down here to the joint plant. So the uses would be that this would be the easiest way to get there with the least amount of pipeline. We'd go from here to here.
But-
So I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but this is the cheapest way to get there.
Given the history of how it's all been developed, doesn't the sanitation district has a San Jose treatment plant someplace in the eastern
Yep.
San Gabriel Valley, and that water
That's
is
here.
purchased by the Water Replenishment District for recharge in the Montebello forebay here, isn't that right?
Yes. So that's right here where I'm circling here between Central and Main San Gabriel. Main San Gabriel looked at a project in which they take flows from San Jose Creek and move it north. So this would be less. But this was not something that the sanitation districts was interested, because all of the flow was already subscribed at San Jose Creek. They also have Los Coyotes, which is down in here. And then there's one with Long Beach that's over here. So all of these plants have already kind of scalped off flow. So what's remaining is down here. And all that water currently goes to the ocean.
And that, I understood that the joint plant was where a lot of industrial waste would go, as opposed to residential wastewater. And so it's a really nasty set of water that it's got really different characteristics. And so there's got a very involved treatment train on it.
Yep, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But this one, yeah, Kathy said, so all of it currently goes to the ocean. And Hyperion is just about up in here. For those of you that are familiar with Hyperion, that's LEDWP's project. So this is the joint plan, about 400. I think I talk about this in another slide. So we're going to take up to 150 million gallons a day for groundwater recharge and what's called raw water augmentation. So that would be taking it upstream of one of our other treatment plants and blend it with other raw sources and then treat it again and then serve it to homes. So that would be enough water for 500,000 people. And it would be the largest water recycling project in the world when we are done.
And
Now the LADWP next, is that going to be at Hyperion?
Yes. And I'll show you a map that shows where it is and how it relates to who's going to serve what in a second.
Oh, is that the one where West Basin's going to do it for them?
Yes.
they do it this way, Matt, is
What?
the reason that you've got so much of this water from this recycled program it's run through RO and UV and advanced filtration and all sorts of stuff. And then they're taking it and they're putting it into groundwater basins and maybe as an influent to a drinking water treatment plant to mix with raw surface water is because the Department of Health Services requires lots of barriers to protect public health. They're concerned that if anything went wrong with the treatment process, that something might get through and end up in somebody's tap. And so if you put it in a groundwater basin and you spread it, then it filters through the aquifer, through the soils, and there's a lot of bacterial action there and chemical interaction, and that's considered, I think it's got to have like a 6-month retention time in the groundwater basin.
Mhm.
And then it's considered that it is safe for a well to intercept that water and provide it as drinking water to various customers. So there's a lot of health considerations that go into how this water gets used to make sure that there aren't accidents.
So I have up now the treatment process. So it'll have membrane bioreactors, which uses biological technology and membrane technologies with really fine particles to both do a physical barrier as well as using bugs to remove any contaminants. Then reverse osmosis, and then it would be ultraviolet light and a chemical process to remove any viruses that may have made it through. With the 2 membrane processes, those are both with smaller membranes than the viruses are. So that's why the process works. They're smaller than any of the bacteria that you might have run into. And so that's how this process works. And ultimately, I think Kathy described it pretty well in thinking about how there's multiple fail-safes along the way that would be before it even gets to a well or a consumer. All right, let's see where we get. This is why we want to do the project. It's drought-proof, replenishes the groundwater basins, especially those that receive state water project only. Those were targeted. It is on this side of the San Andreas Fault, so it does help us with earthquakes. And it helps with the economy, and there is a slide coming up that talks about how it's comparable to other local resources. This is where the joint plant is located, right by the 405 and where the 110 meet, right off Sepulveda Boulevard, which is there in the picture. It has an average flow of 260 million gallons per day. It has a permitted capacity. It has primary and secondary treatment. Primary is just gets the solids out, and secondary treatment makes it safer for contact, for any body contact that might happen with the water. I wouldn't suggest going swimming right below where this exits. And there's no beaches south of here that you would go into. And so all of this water goes through a tunnel system out to the ocean. I think we've got this one here.
What happens to the other 110,000 million gallons? If you're going to treat up to 150 and they get an average of 260.
Yeah, so there's an average flow of 260 throughout the year. The number one day, just so you know, is at halftime on the Super Bowl. That is peak flow for a wastewater treatment plant. And you would have at nighttime, those numbers are low. During the daytime, they're closer to 300 during the daytime. During the nighttime, they're closer to 180. And so there is some loss within the treatment process. So that's why 150 is picked. We are taking the daily low and doing a treatment based upon that. So that's why we want to make sure that we have through our process that it's 100% of the time can run at 150. So if you have daily variations within flow, people aren't up at 3 in the morning using the bathroom. So, well, maybe some people are, but not the majority. Well, during the day, you'd have more people, more water going to the wastewater treatment plant.
So are you going to run at a constant flow rate for a 24-hour cycle?
Yes, 24 hours a day, 365 a year.
Okay, so you're not going to run like when people flush during the daytime when electricity is cheaper. You're just going to run it constantly.
Right. Yep. Run it constantly.
At a constant rate.
At a constant rate. It actually reduces the cost of the facility if you're running it 24/7 than if you're turning it off. And especially if you're doing a biological process, it's not something you can turn off. Are
you going to be like Hyperion, where you take the methane that comes off of the biological process and use that to generate the electricity you use?
That is already being done at the joint plant. At the facility, they already are an energy generator at the joint plant as it is now. So we will also be doing as much as we can of that similar process there. So they already have electrical generation there that runs the entire facility. So they are a electricity neutral facility there already. And I don't think I have it on the diagram, but our facility will be here in the back. The facility, whoops, I clicked on that one. I didn't mean to. So our demonstration facility, which I'll show you in a minute, is right here in the back of the facility. So this is Sepulveda Boulevard right here. And so you'd be right there in the back of the facility. All right, I think I talked about this one. So this is our demonstration facility. We're testing the process. In the photo here, you can see our 2 membrane bioreactors. One would be here would be an oxic environment. This would be an anoxic environment. And then we're testing 2 different membrane processes here. So there's 2 different skids here. And then underneath the canopy here is our RO skids, and all of the other facilities are at this end. It was grand opening on October 10th, 2019. It runs at a half an MGD. So all of the testing that we're doing on this facility is fully open to the public. This facility, we also have a training center, which I don't think I have a picture of. Maybe it's in the next one, that you can actually go visit once COVID is done. But we have virtual tours that if you want to have a tour. Kathy, you were on a tour.
We went on a tour. The Natural Resources Committee went on a tour a couple of years ago.
Yep. So
we were actually the first public group to go through.
Yeah, so now we have a better tour for you. I can guarantee you that.
It's changed?
Well, yeah, because we fine-tuned it based upon people that come and visit and their feedback and stuff. So we've tailored the presentation a little bit. But this is the facility there. Yeah, so just so that you know about program costs, why we're doing this project versus some other projects. These are stormwater projects. They have a large variability in cost depending on what the project is. Projects that are capturing stormwater in a large spreading basin are very low cost. Things like green streets or bioswales or any of those kind of things are at the very, very, very high end. Those would be $20,000 an acre foot or more. Groundwater recovery, so this is treatment of groundwater, is somewhere between $500 and $1,500 an acre foot. Recycled water, we're right in the middle for recycled water projects at $1,800. So that's $3.4 billion. This program creates 42,000 new jobs within our area. So that's actually a really good benefit for our project. And seawater desalinization, because it has extra treatment, it's quite a bit higher. So that's not something that Metropolitan is pursuing on our own. That is something that our member agencies may choose to do. Those of you that are at West Basin, you're probably familiar with desal projects that West Basin is pursuing. And there's the Huntington Beach project, and San Diego has done some desal projects. But it's a pretty affordable project compared to other resources. Yes, there, I knew the picture would be in there. So this is our tour center. Here, anyone that 10 or up are welcome once COVID restrictions are lifted. And you can invite others to attend. There is a virtual tour, which one of our staff members, it could be me, that will walk through it. I was leading a tour in the picture. I'm on the far right. I was leading a tour. And so I'm on the tour team. So it could be me that gives you your tour. I'm on the virtual. So we have our own little center here, air conditioned room that you can go in and then visit the site for a good tour of that. All right, so this, I promised you the different projects. So again, here's Metropolitan's project. The joint plant is down here. Here's all of our different potential pipelines here that we have. So this is the regional recycled water project proposed in blue. And this is where Operation Next, LADWP's project, would come from Hyperion, which is right here by LAX. Would take water and move it throughout their area. They're looking at a very similar project, the biological process, RO, all the same processes that we're looking at. They're looking at that for Hyperion. We have 3 potential locations where there might be a meetup between our 2 projects. So that would be one here, where they may connect to our project. And so the 2 would be connected directly through a pipeline and an interconnect right here. They may have a need for us to take some water. There's another connection here, which the Water Replenishment District is constructing a project here in the West Coast Basin that is looking at that they would provide water to as well. This would also be bringing water to West Basin's Ed Little facility, if you're familiar with that area. And then this is the fun one. This would bring water up to the San Fernando Valley for them and potentially connect up to our Jensen facility. So that would be multiple facilities receiving recycled water as augmentation to the imported supplies that they receive now.
Matt, can you talk about the injection wells that you've noted on this map?
Yes, so the ones in the West Coast, those are going to be constructed by WRD. It's part of there's a salt plume that is there's a barrier that comes through here for keeping seawater out of the groundwater basins. So it's actually a series of injection wells that put water in to create a mound of water to keep the saline water out. And so this project will actually be as part of that. And so this would be a series of injection wells along, I think it's Sepulveda Boulevard, or the one right along the 110 corridor, near Sepulveda. And there'll be a line of injection wells there that are brand new. There'll also be some injection wells here in Long Beach, and some wells in the Montebello forebay. But primarily, we're going to try to use as much existing spreading capacity as possible.
So the Montebello forebay, why would you have wells there?
Because the LA Public Works, who operates the spreading facilities there, said it's going to be up to 120 days that we wouldn't be available. They would not have space for us.
Yeah, so they're holding it for stormwater and the recycled water coming from the San Jose plant.
Right. And up here in the main San Gabriel Basin, we'll be putting water behind Santa Fe. Yep. And somewhere along the...
It's interesting. It's not just your capacity to produce the recycled water. It's the capacity for you to move it somewhere where it could be put back into the ground.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. So it's the most complicated project I've ever worked on. And plus, when you have Operation Next together with it, you end up being able to serve most of LA and Orange County from two facilities, Hyperion and the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant.
Well, but you're not showing all the stuff in Irvine where they do similar advanced treatment and recharge.
Yes, so they do that here in Orange County too. So this would be, they're also doing their project here. So if you have their groundwater GWRS project here, that would also be, that one already exists. So those would be here to deliver water to Anaheim, spreading areas here. So there's recycled water going everywhere.
yeah.
And then for all of you from the beach cities, when you look at the Valley, when you look at Valley Park and you see they're in the process of digging new injection wells and plugging up the old ones that had become so clogged up they weren't very useful. So they're plugging up the old ones and building new ones, and they're adding more because sea level rise has made we need more of them now.
Yeah,
So, right. So keeping this into LA, I was looking at LA County and some
I
parts
know.
of Orange County. Yeah, if we put every project on here, I think you'd go dizzy. So San Diego has theirs too. So hopefully, I may have to go back to some other slides here for a second, because somewhere along the line when I went back, I missed a couple. So it'll actually be good. I'll go back to the beginning and then we can, and then I'll restart it and then we can find those other ones that I've missed along the way. So just in summary, and we're running out of time anyway, so it's all good. We have 88 groundwater basins. 96% of them are either in adjudicated or managed areas. Conjunctive use is a key component of our strategy at Metropolitan. Our current conditions within our groundwater basins, there's been a net loss of over 1 million acre feet from 2000 to 2020. So we're about 400,000 below our healthy storage level today. And in 12 to 18 months, we could begin to be in a serious situation in many of our groundwater basins. So additional recharge is needed. So good luck in that in drought conditions. So that's why recycled water projects are so important. Like the Regional Recycled Water Project, Operation Next, GWRS, San Diego Pure Water. All of those projects maximizing the use of recycled water is the key to the health of our groundwater basins. We have vulnerabilities, water quality, climate change, declining storage, and heavy reliance on a single resource. This is the thing, most of our groundwater basins are heavily reliant on imported supplies. And that's one of the key takeaways, which is the slides that we're missing, and that's okay. Because I slid right past them while we were backing up. And then just some other great stuff is going on in the region for opportunities, increasing recycled water use, maximizing our groundwater basin, and increasing stormwater recharge are how all of those are really good for our region. So I'm going to end there. And there's my contact information if you want to talk more. And I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and we can have a good conversation if you like. We had a lot of great questions, and I couldn't see who was talking. So who had all the great questions?
Was that me?
That was you.
Grace? Oh, was that you? Oh, okay.
That was me. Oh, I want to share my screen real quick.
Oh, for
and
sure.
show you. I want to show my screen. Share. Do you see LA County Waterworks District number 29 on the upper left? That would be like the Malibu area. And you can see that the Malibu area over here uses about 250 gallons per capita per day. And over here in Palos Verdes, they use about 220 gallons per capita per day. And so you can see in Palos Verdes that 2016, they conserved, but then after the drought was over, they went right back to watering. Not as much as before, but they're still watering. And over here in Southwest system, that would be, I think that's like Hawthorne and Gardena. You see that they only use about 70 gallons per capita per day. So there's wide variations in use. And so when we say that a acre foot serves a family of 4, it's really a family of 4, like in these large lot areas. Like if people lived in apartments and they had a water saving appliances, they could be using only 60, 65, and they wouldn't even feel like they were doing anything, experiencing any hardship.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that's something that we've been looking at too, and also looking at how the other thing that we've been looking at, especially in our disadvantaged community areas, those areas are not applying for grants from Metropolitan. They aren't applying for grants really from anywhere to help in bringing in low use appliances into their homes. Generally, most of the conservation credits and incentives that we provide are going to wealthier communities. So there's a program we just started earlier this year in which.
Oh, can you
sorry.
mute yourself? Can you mute yourself, Arnett?
All good. Yeah, we can work with that. But we've been looking at ways in which we can make that fair across all the whole areas and encourage our neighbors in other parts of our cities to apply for those incentives. Because what ends up happening, and this is what we've noticed, is that contractors are the ones who are getting the incentives, not the homeowner or the person in the apartment. So a contractor will come in and say, hey, I'll apply for you and I'll take the money and then I'll install the toilet. Well, they never installed the toilet. They just took the money. So that's kind of the things that we're finding out. So definitely some work that overlaps in a lot of different areas, from income inequalities throughout our region, are affecting a lot of different areas. So yeah, Kathy, you had a question too.
I just wanted to make a comment that I recall a number of years ago when I was still working, that we went to Compton, one of the Metropolitan member agencies, disadvantaged area, and we helped them write their grant proposal. So that's something, I mean, and our general manager at the time was Ron Gastelum, and he was very interested in us doing that. And he had staff out there, and we helped them write their stuff, their applications.
Yeah, my wife went into labor while we were down there. Do you remember that, Kathy?
I don't remember that, but I do recall that there were some there were some shootings happening in Compton, and we see the newspaper the next day and you think, oh my gosh, I was standing out there on that street corner.
But definitely something that we're looking into is trying to find ways in which there can be water equity as well, and especially access to areas where conservation, it affects all of us in our whole service area. Definitely learning that that the conservation dollars weren't going to the individual or the homeowner really was concerning.
That is a problem.
That's a big problem.
Yeah, that's shocking.
That it was going to, I think in our area, we had seen, you know, when there were the landscape transformation dollars were available, that those were companies like Lawn Away, I think was one in our area, that would come and take the credit from Metropolitan and then do your lawn for you. Well, they didn't do a very good job, but they took the money. That was definitely happening in some of the lower income areas of our community. Definitely something that we've seen happen for funding all around. Something we need to work on as a water community, as citizens, and thinking ways that your organization can help. Definitely be thinking about that too.
Yeah, I know that there are wide variations in use between communities. Like in the beach cities, we see like Hawthorne uses a lot less than Palos Verdes. But we also, like I'm from Northern California originally, and East Palo Alto, they only use 38 gallons per capita per day in East Palo Alto. Whereas like right across the street in Palo Alto, it's like 4 times as much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something we've seen too. Some of the state regulations are looking at going down to 42 indoor for the whole state. So that could be interesting.
But so when people ask, why aren't you doing mandatory conservation as a percentage target? It's because our water use is already so unequal. For a lot of people, there's no fat to cut.
Yeah.
Right. Especially those that are under, say, under 50 for indoor use. I mean, if you have an old shower head on your shower, that's 5 gallons a minute. I think my wife would kill me if I said that she had to cut down her shower to 2 minutes in order to make sure that everyone in the shower, everybody got a shower and using the dishwasher. And I think it's something we really have to be thinking about, which is why there's not percentage reductions, is because there are so many that are not using a lot of water. I mean, our next door neighbors don't have a lawn at all. They don't water at all. So it's a very different way of thinking about it, but definitely some good conversation today. And
does anyone else have any questions? I feel like I've been hogging it all. No questions?
Well, I have a comment.
So, the legend on your first names and dollar amounts.
Ready?
Yes.
I have a comment. I'm wondering why it costs so much more to do recycled water, which I went on a great tour in the district years ago, had a tour that drank the water at the end, and why it costs more to do that than to desalinize ocean water.
Well, there's a range. There's a range, and there's an overlap in the range.
yeah,
It sounded from this report that they do very little desalinization because it costs too much.
right. So it's a lot more power intensive because you have to push the water through a small membrane. Think of it as if you're pushing water through a piece of paper. And
So
you need a lot of power to do that pushing.
So the process costs a lot more.
Yes.
Well, you're using the reverse osmosis. You're using the same membrane equipment, but because you have more salt, you have to apply more power and you have to apply more electricity. So basically, it scales with the amount of stuff you're trying to remove out of it.
Okay.
And so that's why water uses more electricity, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to use electricity because the Department of Energy is trying to find more uses for electricity during the daytime to facilitate development of solar power. So we're trying to find what's called demand response. We're trying to find daytime users of electricity. And that's why electric cars, even though they're just such big energy hogs, they're good, and desalination's an energy hog, but they're good for sopping up the electricity that would ordinarily be like daytime electricity rates or wholesale electricity rates are basically zero because there's such a glut of solar power during sunny days in California. And so we need to find a customer for that electricity, or else no one's going to develop any more solar.
Right, right. And plus, I'll also say this, it takes a portfolio approach to use lots of different resources: imported water, desalination, water recycling, stormwater, groundwater. All of those are required to improve reliability in our cities and areas here in Southern California. It's not just where you're going to have a silver bullet where, ooh, groundwater is going to solve the world. It's not. You need all of these resources together in order to meet the needs of our growing communities here in Southern California.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And
Matt,
West Basin is definitely doing, working on putting together a desalination facility. Huntington Beach is looking at it, and the city of Oxnard in San Diego County, I mean, not Oxnard, Oceanside, they already have a desal facility in that area in San Diego County. So
And West Basin already has a desalination plant in Torrance because our wells, they run a small reverse osmosis plant in central Torrance because we have that salt plume coming in from the ocean through the Dominguez Channel. And so we have to desalinate our groundwater here.
yep.
I thought that was old historic salt plume that got through the seawater barrier years ago, and they've been trying to get rid of it.
Yeah, I think it got
Like it's
in.
an ongoing issue.
Yeah,
got
it
in
got
through
in
the
the
Dominguez.
1950s, I think.
It got in through and the break is near the Dominguez Channel. So
See,
where the hydrology goes through the Dominguez area, that's the break in where it broke across. And
Right, and that's why we're building so many more injection wells in that area too.
yep, very good. All right, thank you for having me.
Matt, it's been really fun. I really, really appreciate your taking your evening away from baseball and come to talk to us. I've really enjoyed it. I hope we all learned as much as I did. I
I
really,
learned a lot, and you sent us the slides, and we're going to post the slides on our website. And we hope to, as soon as I figure out how to do the recording, post it too.
Very good. I appreciate that. Yeah, so there's no cheering I've been hearing the entire time. So I think, I don't know what the
That
score
might
is.
not
but
be, well, last time I checked it, it was 1-0 Dodgers.
all right.
or maybe you
Oh, it's
didn't.
1-1. It's apparently 1-1 now.
Okay. All right. Good night, everyone. Nice seeing
night.
you virtually. And I'll come back next month where Kathy and I are going to talk about who fills your taps.
Yeah,
Like when you turn on the tap, where does your water come from? I mean, you gave us a little taste of that, but we're going to talk about water purveyors and water wholesalers and water agencies and what they all do.
everybody's got a different water agency, and so maybe a different mix of water. And so we were going to talk about that to try to expand upon what Matt talked with us about today.
And then we saw William Oda was on to check out, because he's going to be our December speaker. He's going to talk about urban rivers, urban water management, and the effect that it has on rivers.
Wow, it sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
We can
Definitely.
invite you if you're interested, Matt.
Yeah, you should come. I mean, you can do whatever you like, but I hope you come in December, because I've heard William give this talk before, and that's why I invited him, because I thought it was so fascinating.
Oh, very good. Very good.
And
All
he-
right. Thank you, guys.
Okay, yeah, it's his PhD research, so he's been shopping out this talk.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Okay,
Good night, everyone, and thank you for coming.
thank
Yep.
you.
See you all later.